Welcome to the Pengafolder podcast with your host, Nana and Emily. They invest remotely in the UK and live in Sweden. In this podcast, they will be interviewing interesting guests that all invest in the UK property market.
Hi and welcome. How is it, Ian?
It's good. It's good. Thank you. We're in the north of England, speaking to you from my bedroom because we're locked down at the moment, but I do a lot of work from here. I've got my computer.
That's nice. That I bet then you're having like your pajamas.
Yeah, I will stand up. In case you're videoing.
So who is Ian?
Well, I'm as I was speaking earlier, I'm from Hull. Grew up near Hull. My professional background is I'm an environmental health officer. Been in that trade for over 30 years now. However, I never really wanted to stick at local government because you give your whole life to it, retire with a pension, and you think, hang on a minute, I could have done more. So I got into housing. I currently run a letting agent with nearly 200 properties. I'm a significant landlord myself. And I do some development. I'm just looking at doing something with one of my relatives, a nephew who's keen on getting into it. I've got two of my children into it. Two of them each own two houses themselves. And just doing things such as that. But having the background in environmental health does give me a certain advantage. Currently, I've got my letting agents up for sale and a sale agreed. I'm going to switch into consultancy because I say switch into consultancy, I'm going to be semi-retired. I mean, I'm 55. I don't want to work forever. So I will be helping landlords, I suppose. I will be doing some training. I can train environmental health officers now in the system of inspection and risk assessment of their properties and various other things. I'm putting something together with the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, who are our regulating body, and they want me to do presentations for them. Currently, it's going to be online, but hopefully I'll be meeting people again in the not too distant future, because I'm hoping by the summer we're like you in Sweden. We cross over it all.
Hopefully we can start meeting people. I'm just looking forward to coming back to the UK and networking, etc. So fingers crossed, like you mentioned.
Well, have to meet up when you do.
Definitely.
Have a coffee together. Go through some numbers. I like numbers.
I
like numbers if you're a housing person.
I bet you do. So. Yeah. So tell me, what's the difference between HMO and BYTO regulation for the listeners?
Well, HMO is like BYTO with an added layer of regulation, and a very thick layer, I have to say. BYTO, most of the regulation is based on risk assessments using a system called the Housing Health and Safety Rating System. Now, when I teach this to environmental health officers, it's a 2-day course with a gap in between the days and homework. And the homework consists of an inspection, preparing a report and doing the risk assessment. So what you do with that is you look at a house, you look at everything that's wrong with the house. That's what you call the defects. And then you risk assess them, having the effects of the defects on hazards, known hazards in the property. And then you apply a numerical score using guidance, using previous examples where it's been validated. And then the numbers, as we mentioned, the numbers count, and the numbers reflect how serious the defect, the hazard is. And this is how you can compare defects such as defects that affect your health, like falling down the stairs, falling out of windows, to fire, to keeping warm, to the fear of being burgled, how you can compare all of those together. There's a lot of detail in there, but that's basically as it is. HMOs, they're by nature a different animal. You've got communal living in HMOs. And because of that, you've got higher standards and higher standards of regulation, because there are greater risks in HMOs. I mean, when I give my course, I use my family as a comparison of my house. So in my house, I'm an owner-occupier, I own my house. But you've got a structure in a family. We cook once and eat together for the evening meal. At night time, I make sure the doors are locked. If there's a fire, I actually have been a bit nerdy on this. I've got an automatic fire detection system in the house, which is a bit more than you need. I've interlinked everything, but I quite like doing that. I'm practical. I own a building company as well. I do lots of renovations, so I like to get to grips with these things. And because of that, you've got two elements. You've got if there's a likelihood of something happening, it's reduced because of the way you live in the house. If something like fire does happen, the likely harm is reduced as well, because you've got greater chance of getting out. Now compare that to a HMO. You've got communal living, you've got individuals that might have something in common, but they're not family. So there might be a group of friends or a group of students, but there might be individuals who just come from different places, different walks of life, rent a room together, they've got a lock on the door, and they share the kitchen, they share the bathrooms, and they've got very little to do with each other. Well, then you've got more use of facilities. You might have 5 people cooking individually in the kitchen. You might have different people operating different shifts, doing different cooking. Somebody might be using it when others are asleep, and if they have a fire, do they know where everybody is? This is where you've got the greater regulation that's deemed necessary because of the increased risk in a HMO. And then there's the way the regulation is applied. Housing regulation is what's called strict liability. You have no defense to say you never knew. It's up to you as the landlord or letting agent to some extent to be aware of your responsibilities. And I compare this to when I was younger and I had a car, and I was told by my father, he said, just don't mess about with the police, because they'll find something wrong with your car if they want to check. I guarantee I could go into your home and I could find something wrong with it. It's just a question of what.
Yeah.
So you've got to check it yourself, make sure. There are some things that are absolute in family lets, as I like to call them. You need an alarm, a smoke alarm on every floor. You need a carbon monoxide alarm where there is a solid fuel appliance in a kitchen, in a living room and bedroom. These are just specific regulations. You need heating systems in it, etc., etc. There's some absolutes, but other things are risk assessed, and there you look towards guidance, you look towards increasing your knowledge. Strongly recommend you join an association and you become accredited. And to maintain the accreditation, the good associations require some degree of training, because the law is changing. The law is changing frequently, too frequently. We have a Conservative government in, and the right wing in the UK, and they have increased regulation of housing so much. I thought they would do the reverse, but no. It's a generally good reason, but it brings more responsibility onto landlords. You need to know what you are doing, or know somebody who does.
So even people that are doing standard buy-to-let, should they be in contact with people like you then before purchasing a property, just to see what to expect of them? Or is it just when you're doing maybe HMOs?
I would recommend for all of them. And I'm not trying to sell myself, but you contact the council, you get your own training, because the more you do, the more you reduce the risk, because there's a lot of risk. There's a legal phrase, caveat emptor, buyer beware. And generally, if you buy a property, it's up to you to make sure that you know what you're doing. You buy a property that's got something wrong with it that devalues it, that's your loss. And you can mitigate it to some extent with surveys, but it's generally, or nearly always, very wise to have an idea of what you're doing. And I have to say, probably shouldn't say this, I've made loads of mistakes, but you learn from your mistakes. I've bought quite a few houses, far more than the average person, And I remember the first one I made, I paid too much. The first one I bought, I paid too much. I think the third one I bought, I took about 4 months to renovate it because I tried to do it myself. I should have just brought somebody in, got it done in 1 month, and get 3 more months of rent without where I'd have my mortgage cleared, all of that sort of thing. So things such as that, you learn, you make mistakes and you learn. I'm very good at keeping boilers going now. Because they're expensive. That being said, I've had 2 boilers go this year already.
Oh wow!
In my own properties. They were old. One of them actually is a recent purchase, and so the history of it isn't mine. Otherwise, I would have kept it going.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So following question: that is there different type of HMOs and why?
Yes, there are. HMO, the definition of HMO, you get lots of phrases. You get minimo, you get multi-let. Those are nonsense. They don't mean much. The general phrases with no legal definition. HMO, to be a HMO, it's got to pass the test, and generally it's 3 or more people, 2 or more family groups. That's the type of HMO I think we're talking about here. Now, you can have a HMO where you have a group of students who all come together on one tenancy agreement, group of migrant workers who, rather than paying for individual rooms, would rather share on one tenancy. Those groups tend to pay their own bills. They tend to have something in common. They tend to socialize together or work together or sometimes even eat together. That is a lower risk. It's a high risk than a family. It's a lower risk than what I call a bedsit type HMOs, where you've not got where the people don't know each other when they come in, where you've got individual tenancies. The first groups will tend to be on one tenancy agreement, where they're individuals, bedsits, there tend to be a tenancy per room. And they might have some degree of interaction, but it's usually a lot less. And that tends to mean it's a different type of use of the property, bit less different wear and tear on the property. You've got to maintain it differently. I have to say, there are other HMOs in the Housing Act 2004. There's what's called a Section 257 HMO, and that's where you have a flat in a building that's not purpose-built for flats. It was converted pre-1991, and there's 1 or 2 other requirements about owner occupancy in there. That's a whole new area, but that's also a type of HMO. So there are different types, and they tend to be governed different tenancies. There was a famous case at Sheffield versus Barnes, where a landlord, Mr. Barnes, had a notice served on him by Sheffield Metropolitan Borough Council, and they required works because his property was a HMO. It was a student house, and I would call that a HMO. He disagreed, and he appealed, and it went all the way up to the House of Lords, which was at the time the highest court in the land. Until recently, it was the European Court was the highest. Now it's back to being the highest court in the land. It's exceptions. Anyway, he won. Wow. They said that student house wasn't a HMO. Bit of a shock, and that made enforcement very difficult. But the government in 2000, who brought in the Housing Act 2004, tried to simplify it. They brought in the definition of 3 or more people, 2 or more family groups. There are, with family groups, you look at 258 of the Housing Act, I think it is, where it defines it, and that's looking at they consider the same family if they're husband and wife. If they're living as husband or wife, you can have husband and husband. You can have down to first cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces living together. You can have adopted children living together. They're all counted as the same family. There's probably another 1 or 2 I've missed out on there. But it's generally by what they call blood or marriage. But you can have your best friend living with you, unless you're related to him. Otherwise, if it's 3 or more people, would make your house a HMO.
Ah, okay. So we got a history lesson there as well, listeners.
Thank you.
So how long does the license apply for, a HMO license?
Right. So there's two types of HMO license: mandatory and additional HMO. Both last for up to 5 years. I'll say up to. Usually it's 5 years. However, some councils, because they want people to be, if they're new to it, they might have an introductory period where they'll have a license for a year and they'll have to go through the application process. So one or two other things the councils can do, but generally it's 5 years, though it can be less. So the license, during the period of the license, you will have the property, or you should have it inspected at least once, just to ensure compliance with the conditions. Now, I have to say, when you get a HMO license, I know this sounds obvious, read it. Recently, there's a landlord I know who came to me, he's in Hull, and he said, I'm being prosecuted. Why? I got a license and they've come and inspected it, and I've not done these things. Why have you not done these things? Basically, he didn't read the license. He got it, he filed it, he forgot it.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things he's getting prosecuted, or got prosecuted for, he didn't have a copy of the license displayed in the property. All HMO licenses will have a requirement that a copy of the license is displayed in the property. There's a reason for that, because it's not just the council who you're answerable to, it's your tenants. And they will tend to read it and think, oh, hang on a minute. Does he do this? Has he done that? Has he got the other? And they will check and make sure. And if you don't do it, they will go, many of them will go to the council and say, he's not done this. Now, there are quite serious penalties for not complying with license conditions. It's up to £30,000.
Wow.
Condition. You can have 30 conditions on a license. Imagine it. This guy got done for 4. First offence, they only did him for 17,000. That's enough. There's something else you need to know about this. It's not a fine. It's a penalty. Penalty charge notice. It's not a criminal record. You might think, wonderful. The council get to keep the money. Yeah. And you see the incentive the council have got.
Yeah.
And you imagine the council meeting. All right, guys, ladies, we've had a budget cut this year. I'm going to have to let 1 or 2 of you go unless you can get some more of these licenses inspected and find some conditions have not complied with, get the penalty charge notices out. So be careful. Now, you can appeal against them, but remember what I said at the beginning. Strict liability. The responsibility is on you to make sure that you comply. You cannot say, I never knew. So it's difficult. You can usually go for mitigation. That's what I advise this friend of mine to do. That's to throw yourself at their mercy. Get the works done yesterday and make sure you can show compliance, first offence, etc., check up other cases. He potentially could have been done for 120,000 there.
Oh, wow.
He got done for 17. It hurt him. Next time he does that, it won't be so lenient.
No.
Lenient.
So does the license apply to the property itself, or is it the person?
Right. An important point, that, because the license goes with the person. Okay. So if you, as a person, if you buy a HMO that's licensed, you don't get the license. You need to license it. Now, there is an offence for operating a property that needs a license if you do not have the authority of a license. And but you either need a license, you need to have made a valid application, or you need a temporary exemption notice to be compliant. There is another way as well. If it's a mandatory HMO license, which kicks in at 5 or more people. If you've only got 4, don't go for the 5th one until you've got one of those in place. Now, the application isn't just to fill in a form. You need certificates. You need to pay. So you will need the following the following documents. You will need, probably the hardest one to get is a plan of the property. This isn't just a sketch of it. You need to have a scale drawing of the property. Sometimes they'll specify 1 to 100. It's to show escape routes, among other things, and escape distances potentially. We also need to go down to the detail of showing where all the smoke alarms and heat detectors are, where any sounders are, when any electrical sockets are, radiators, fire doors, fire escape windows, that level of detail. So it's not something that's that easy to do. I find that's the hardest thing to get done. And once you get a plan of your property, get it on a PDF and keep it forever. Even if you make some alterations, you've got the blueprint of the property, the basics, and you can add sockets and doors and things. The other things you need a gas safety certificate, a valid gas safety certificate. Now, they last 12 months. Now, gas safety certificates, that's if you've got gas in your property, sorry. If you don't have gas, you won't need it. The last 12 months, you must always have one. Now, in England, you have a 2-week period whereby if your gas safety is due in the next 2 weeks and you get one done within 2 weeks of the due date, it can be post-dated from when it was due. So you've got 2-week overlap within which to get it. But from experience, don't rely on that, because you'd be surprised how many people don't turn up for appointments, especially this time with this pandemic on. People decide the shielding, all sorts of, you could never anticipate every reason. So you've got to be careful for that. You need an EICR, it's called Electrical Inspection and Condition Report. That will be a check to the British Standard 7671 of the fixed electrical appliances except for emergency lighting and fire alarm. And it will to make sure that those are safe. Now, important that they're safe doesn't mean they need to be up to the latest standard. Some electricians are going around there and saying, oh, you're not up to the latest regs, and they're giving people bills, hundreds of pounds, 500, £1,000 I've heard of, to upgrade to the latest standard, and they don't need it. It needs to be safe, okay? They last, as I said, 5 years. You need a check on your fire alarm system. Now that's up to BS 5839. That lasts either 6 months or 1 year, but it doesn't, you don't just look at it every 6 months or 1 year. It depends on it's a maintained or non-maintained system. That's a non-maintained system might be in a block of flats, for example, where it doesn't get regular checking by individuals. But if it's in one house, it'll usually be a maintained system. It's a 12-month check, but you do monitoring of the system as well. Now, there's no point in having it checked one day and the next day it's turned off. How frequently do you monitor? As frequently as is necessary. I'm sorry if that's not helpful, but you will find the reason it's not specified, there's guidance, they recommend at least every 2 weeks. But if you've got somebody who you think might be tampering with a system, it's no point in checking it and one day and 13 days later coming down and finding you've had 13 days of no alarm system because somebody wants to smoke in the room, so they've turned it off. So you need to be as often as is necessary and make sure people aren't tampering with it. Now that's a simple check. That's making sure that you've not had soundings, it's not been activated. You've got LEDs on it, make sure they show green, not red. Make sure they work. Sometimes I've seen tenants disconnect alarms and put them back up, and they look like they're doing a job, but they're not because the LED's not on. And the reason they disconnect it because they keep burning the dinner in the next room, and they like to prop the door open, such as that. So
I had a following question regarding the gas certificate and etc. Ain't UK moving away from this gas that you're like supposed to have no gas in, I think, in some years, right?
I think I might be wrong, but I think it's 2025 for new builds. We won't be putting gas in.
Okay, so the old ones are allowed to have gas. The
existing will stay for now. They're looking at changing some to hydrogen, but personally, I think we'll go electric. We'll go electric. We'll have a lot of heat pumps, but we'll have to upgrade our insulation. We've got a lot of old housing here with walls at a solid brick, 9 inches, which is 225 centimeters mils, and it's just not great at insulating. And so when you put something that's not a really strong heating source, like a ground source or air source heat pump, they work too hard trying to keep the house warm. So we're going to have to do a combination of increased insulation and other forms of heating. But yeah, we are moving away from gas. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Next certificate for your HMO license. 5266, that's your emergency lighting. Sometimes, but not always, you will need emergency lighting. And that is lighting that is powered from the mains, but with a battery backup. So when the mains goes out, there's still some light there. It's not strong lighting, but it's enough to see by. And this will be put where there is a hazard on the escape route. So there might be a change in direction, a change in level, something such as that. Where one of the big things people think, oh, fire alarm, emergency, run out the place. The biggest risk actually is a false alarm, people breaking a leg, falling down the stairs or something, when there's no fire. So make it as safe as they can to get out. So emergency lighting when necessary. Take advice on that. Usually a council officer will ask. You don't have to have a fully compliant HMO to make your application for a license. They will come around and probably require something in addition to what you've done, provided it's not too much. And then you'll have as a license condition. So get all these certificates. So you've got your plan, you've got your gas safety, EICR, BS5, that's on your fixed electric, 767, that's B7671, your 5839 on your alarm system, your 5266 on your emergency lighting. You could also need a PAT test, which is a portable appliance test. That's anything that basically can move, fridges, anything with a socket, plug into an electrical socket, more or less. Make sure that they're safe. That's not a standard condition, but it's often required. But get all of those certificates together. Make your application, they're usually online. And then if you're buying a property, go through the application process before you buy. Make sure you're familiar with it, you know all these things. And then rubber stamp it effectively with a payment. Once you've provided all this information, filled in the application, made the payment, you have made a proper application, provided you've not lied or any big mistakes. Then you're protected from not having a HMO license. Otherwise, it's an potentially unlimited fine. And then your tenants can claim the rent back.
Oh, wow. No, the thing people usually do is, what I see is very wrong, is that they buy the property first and then they apply for the license. They should do the other way around if that's possible, I guess.
You need to prepare. You can make the application, but you can do it on day one. But I recommend that you have a dry run. You get your certificates, everything ready. And like I say, have a go at the license before you buy. And then when you buy, make the application. Once you've made a valid application, you're okay. You should get a license issued in due course. Generally, it's within a year. But I have to say, I think I'm setting a record for the length of time a council has taken to issue a license. I've frightened them. They've, one we manage, I've challenged them. And I know they're wrong. That's why I've challenged. And I'll tell you what I've challenged them on, its occupancy. An 8-bed HMO, it's got 4 rooms, I think it is, that are potentially double. Maximum occupancy of 10. They wanted us to limit it to 8 people, 1 person per room. I said, no, I want 4 rooms as double, 4 rooms as single, which gives us an occupancy of 12, potentially. But cap it at 10 because that's what the facilities limit it at. Simple. And they seem to have got that wrong, so they don't know what to do. So just admit you don't know. Listen to me. Give me the license. I'm protected from any prosecution because the application is accepted and valid. But there is a government mistake with HMO licensing that I think you're dealing with politicians with this often, and they don't know what they're doing sometimes. You cannot enforce one of the types of eviction notices without a valid HMO license. So a Section 21 notice won't work without. So good to get the license.
So you mentioned the mandatory and the additional license. So what is selective licensing?
Okay, I'll go through all 3. Mandatory HMO licenses are where you have 5 or more people in a property who are not all related. If you've got fewer than 5, so 4 or 3, it can still be a HMO, but it wouldn't fall under mandatory HMO licensing. You are still subject to HMO management regulations, which will require most of the things. But sometimes a council may say in an area, we've got an area with a particular problem with HMOs, let's say it's near an agricultural area, we've got lots of migrant workers working on farms and problems with that, we need to regulate it more effectively. They might see the need to bring in an additional HMO licensing scheme, which means they can license 3 or 4 occupant properties. Notice I didn't say 3 or 4 bed. It's not the number of bedrooms, it's the number of occupants. So properties with 3 or 4 people can be licensed under additional HMO licensing. Now they may think, okay, we need to license everything in that area, everything that's in the private rented sector. And that's where selective licensing comes in. There are subtle differences between HMO licensing and selective licensing. Councils have broader powers with HMO, they're higher risk properties. So they can bring in things, and they're starting to bring in things such as additional training required, which I think is a good thing. But they're also starting to bring in things, I've seen some of them where they're requiring planning permission or proof of planning. Make sure you know you've got planning when you buy your HMO, because you might not get your license. It may be that the previous license was granted without that requirement. They've brought it in since, because it's not a standard condition of HMO licenses. It's a discretionary condition, and the councils have this discretion to require these things. Now with selective licensing, they're quite limited in what they can require. It's only what they can require on a non-licensed property. So no different. So with selective licensing, you have to do what you'd have to do anyway. It's just a way of making sure that people are doing it, because it's hard to tell what properties are rented and what properties are owner occupied. It's also hard to tell which among the rented properties which are HMOs and which are not. I want you to remember the definition of a HMO. You've got, let's say you rent a house to a couple and they invite their friend to stay. It's a HMO.
Yeah.
You're subject to HMO management regulations, potentially additional HMO licensing. We'll get on to later. You could be subject to planning requirements.
Oh,
just
wow.
because they've got a friend stay. Remember David Howard said he had a house with 2 teachers sharing.
Yeah.
And then 2 female teachers, and one of these female teachers became pregnant. Well, suddenly that was going to be a HMO because they weren't related, those 2 teachers. That was going to be 3. By the way, the baby doesn't count till it's 1 year old. 1 year after birth, it's a HMO. So unfortunately, he had to change the occupancy, which is life, and it's one of the downsides of regulation.
Yeah. So what information will be required for an HMO license then?
Okay, when you make your license application, they will ask you various questions. So there's your personal details, name, address, get national insurance number, get your date of birth. This is so that you can be traced if necessary. They'll want to know if you've got any other HMO licenses in other areas. They might want to check, make sure you've not got any problems in the areas, housing related problems. They'll want to know if you've been convicted of any criminal offences, any specific criminal offences. So they'll check you for, they'll ask you to make a declaration usually, but they can do what's called a DBS, data barring service check. And that will be a check on your criminal history. So they will check, they're not interested in things like a speeding ticket or driving, but they're interested in things like fraud, violence, Housing Act offences, sexual offences. You're dealing with potentially vulnerable people in these houses. They want to know that you're not likely to take advantage of them. That doesn't stop you from owning a property. If you've got these offences, you cannot manage the property. So they will want that up front. Sometimes there's a company who owns it. They'll do a check on the directors as well. Like I just mentioned, might be a managing agent. We want to check on the managing agent, make sure he or she hasn't got any of these offences in their history. And you can have situations where there's a husband, wife, and the husband. One guy I know who, when he was a young lad, he got into trouble with the police. He'd gone out with the wrong type of people, got drunk, got into a fight, got done for assault, and he couldn't manage the property, but his wife could. So he was okay. So things like that, it can catch people out, because this guy was 40 odd years old. He's a really good guy, a builder, excellent property, but he just had this blemish on his record. Some offences are time barred by the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. Things like sexual offences are not. They stay with you for life unless they're appealed successfully.
Okay. So that leads me into my following question. What are the minimum measurements per room? I know UK have a standard, but then also every council has their own.
Yes, there's some regulations came out 2017, I think it was, it came out, set the minimum standard 6.52 square meters for a bedroom as a minimum size. That's if there is a communal room. Otherwise, it's 10.22. This is off the top of my head. And there is a smaller measurement for a child under 15 of 4.61. But you don't want, personally, I don't like children in HMOs because you're sharing facilities with people who might not be related to or might not know. So you've got to be careful there. Notice I mentioned if there's a communal room or not. If you have a communal room, you can have a single room with 6.52, a double room with 10.22 square meters. But if there is no communal room, the single room is 10.22 and the double room is 15 square meters. Okay, the reason for the difference is that it's assumed they will have to socialize in their room rather than being able to use a communal room for socializing. Councils do have now some discretion to vary this, which is very annoying, because if there's an oversupply of rooms in the area, they might say, okay, we'll give the tenants more. And suddenly your 5-bed HMO or your 8-bed HMO becomes a 3-bed HMO, something silly like that. What you can often do is make one of the bedrooms into a communal room so that you can have smaller bedrooms and still be okay. But generally it results in lower occupancy. So just have an eye to that. If you're investing in an area, that could happen. It has happened in some places.
Yeah. So why does room size differ when it's cohesive groups and none?
Non-cohesive group. This is about the socializing. With a cohesive group, that's where you have the people who come together and then get the house. Non-cohesive groups come individually to the house. So cohesive groups, they will have the communal room. They will have that's where they socialize. I can remember being a student, we had the dining room, and that's where we watched the telly and ate our food and got drunk and things. But if we didn't have that, we'd have to have we'd have to have bigger bedrooms. So that's the difference. It's where they socialize, how they socialize. They've got to have the ability. It's good for their mental health, good for their happiness and their well-being.
So I have a question. I don't know maybe if you can answer it, but what I don't know if you've seen this through investors. They've been hit by the council tax per room and not the whole building.
Yeah.
Why is this happening, and how can people or investors get around it if they can?
Well, the first thing is the council tax. What is subject to council tax is determined by the valuation office, not the councils. And what you are finding is when some properties are being flagged to them because they've gone through planning, they've gone through building control, and they've made the rooms partly self-contained. And this is where they've put an ensuite on. And that seems to be enough to trigger the valuation office to make that room subject to Band A council tax. Normally, it's the whole house is subject to council tax, often Band A, but it could be a higher band. But where there's some degree of self-containment, they can make the room subject to council tax. How do you get away with it? To be honest, it's not easy, and it's risky. I've heard of stories where people have said, well, I'll make a room not an ensuite by putting 2 doors to it, one to the a hallway so other people can use it, and one to the bedroom. and you make them shared between 2 bedrooms, a Jack and Jill. So when one person unlocks one door, the door into the other bedroom locks, and then so that they can't, in theory, both have the same access at the same time. Bit risky. I think Jack and Jill's work, but check it for yourself. And then there's been others where people have tried to introduce some degree of sharing into these bathrooms, but you have a bit of a contradiction here, because you are being penalised for raising the standard. You're being charged additional council tax because all you're trying to do is make it better for the tenants. And I think that's wrong. And I think the reason for that is because council tax isn't designed for HMOs. Personally, I think there needs to be a different type of council tax for HMOs, but that may be an excuse for councils to charge them even more money. We do sometimes have it quite good, because I've seen HMOs where there's 8 rooms, 10 people, 1 band-aid council tax, and that's cheap. But that being said, council tax is to cover various services, many of which a HMO won't need. So it's things like care services for elderly, things like schools is a big one, because you don't tend to have children in HMOs that need schooling. So I predict in the next 10 years there'll be some change on that front, and we'll try to make it more designed for the purpose it's fulfilling, but at the moment it doesn't.
So investors should be careful then.
Yes, yeah. Be careful. And I've heard of people getting away with it. I don't know if they can be backdated, any council tax bills, but councils are always after money, and you run the risk of them coming back and giving you a big bill, and you're trying to justify not paying it.
So could you explain Article 4 that you mentioned before for the listeners?
Not fully, because it's quite a big and complex thing. With respect to HMOs, certainly. When you operate a HMO, a house, a normal family house, you are under a planning use class known as C3. If you have you can have up to 6 people in that house who are not related. It's the same use class, C3. If you go over 6 people, you need a different planning consent, and that's what's called sui generis. Now, other than that, you don't need any planning permissions to run a HMO, except where you have what's called an Article 4 area. And councils have brought in these Article 4 areas. And it covers, it's conservation really, but it covers other things, including it brings in another use class known as C4. And a property needs a C4, needs permission to use C4 use class, where they have between 3 and 6 people who are not related. So what happens there is, if you are not in an Article 4 area, you can just convert a house into a HMO up to 6 people without the need for planning permission. If it's in Article 4, you need planning permission to go up to 6 people. Anywhere, you need planning permission to go over 6 people. Now, there's another addition to this, because Article 4 is relatively new. They couldn't backdate it. So where you have an Article 4 direction, as it's called, brought in to bring in Article 4 into an area, then any existing HMO with between 3 and 6 people is automatically given C4 use, unless the use is converted back into C3. That is not into family use, not for occupancy by people who are not related. So what you have there is, you have HMOs where you can, sometimes you could, if the market changes, put a family in, and then if it changes back, change it to a HMO. In an Article 4 area, you would need planning permission to do that. Now, to get planning permission, you have to make an application, and I would strongly recommend you check the council's planning policy, because they will want, what they want to do, planning permission, it covers the buildings in an area, but it also covers the use in the area, and it covers the mixture of tenure in an area, among other things. And so they're looking in Article 4 areas not to have too big a concentration of HMOs, because it can make the area into an area they don't want it to be like. And so what they will do is, if you want to make an application for a C4 use, there will be something in their planning policy which will give you an idea of whether you're likely to succeed or not with your application. So they will say things such as, and no more than 1 in 10 houses down any particular street can be a HMO, or no HMOs within 50 meters of another HMO. Those are examples, but there'll be something in the planning policy. So if you want to buy a property and convert it into a HMO and you need that C4 use, then I strongly recommend you either get a planning consultant or you become one yourself effectively, because it's quite hard. Read their planning policy and see what restrictions they have. Word of warning, unlike HMO licensing, planning is fairly subjective. HMO licensing, you meet the conditions, you get the license. Planning, they ask people. Nobody living in an area wants a property nearby to be a HMO. They all assume there will be bad properties. You will get objections, you just will. A further word of warning, you buy a property that's being used as a HMO and you want to use it as a HMO, I strongly recommend you establish the planning before you buy it. The reason is because so many of these properties are operating what they call it granddad rights or established use. So established use is only really valid if you can demonstrate it. So if you can demonstrate that your property has had C4 use since Article 4 came in, go for a certificate of lawful use, or the owner should. And that means you've formalized it. You have C4 use. You're not just assuming it and defending it, because you'll need to show that use and unbroken use since Article 4 came in. So you need to have things such as council tax records, tenancy agreements, that sort of, maybe HMO licenses can help contribute to it. Otherwise, you might be buying an expensive family let, very compliant family let. And don't ask the HMO officer for planning advice, because they often don't know. I mean, it's not intended to be too disrespectful, but I've seen something, I've heard them say things and I think that's not correct. And it's your money. You could lose a lot of money here. You find there are some councils, particularly big ones, where the different departments have nothing to do with each other. And you'll find that sometimes the environmental health officer who you go to for HMO licensing advice will give you everything you need to do. And then you think, great, and you buy the property, you go through all the hoops, and then the planning say, you need permission. And if you don't have permission, you can't use it. Not for that use. So be very careful, very careful.
Okay, yeah. So I think you answered it very well. Now we have come to my fun questions. So the first question is: if you have unlimited funds, who would you have as a mentor?
I'd have to go for the sage of Wall Street, Warren Buffett. He's a great guy. I like him. He just speaks sense all the time. I think he's somebody I could sit down with and listen to. Some people you listen to and you think, well, yeah. But him, I would never be bored listening to him. He's very, very astute, very intelligent guy.
Yeah.
And he would take you beyond property. I mean, in fact, he probably wouldn't do much on property because he knows about managing money and investing, and he's got his values in the right place. He's not showy or anything. He's just a good guy.
Yeah, that's true. So, one book to recommend to your child or children. It doesn't have to be property.
Right. So something I'm very keen on is in business, in management, and I tell people this, and I see people making mistakes on it all the time. It's how to manage your money. Because it's about managing money. I see so many landlords who are skint, or they've bought bad investments, or they treat their property as a wage and they don't save up. And then as soon as something goes wrong, they're in trouble. It would be Rich Dad Poor Dad, the Robert Kiyosaki, that's the correct pronunciation, books. I think it's an embellished book. It's not exactly based entirely on fact, but the philosophy is absolutely sound. And I've actually bought it for my kids, and I believe they've read it.
I believe they've read it.
Yeah,
you should double check. You should ask them like
give them questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about one book for every investor? It doesn't need to be property.
Napoleon Hill, How to Make Friends and Influence People.
Great book.
Yeah, and it stood the test of time. It's something such as that.
And then one property book then.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know of a specific property book, because the property market is dynamic. It changes. You could have a book that applied in 10 years ago that would make you poor now. I think you've got to keep your finger on the pulse and know your market, know what will work today and what won't work.
Yeah, that's true.
When the market's going down, I think renting works, but when the market goes up, sales and development work. A couple of months ago, I sold a house purely because people paying silly money for them. And I made 35,000 profit on a little ex-council house. I thought, well, I'm an idiot for not doing that, because it'd take me a good few years to make it by renting it. So I'm not precious about these assets. They've got to work for you.
Yeah.
And so
the market is hot, really hot. Do you think this is sustainable?
No. In fact, I'd slightly disagree with you. I think it's been hot and it's cooling. We've had a unique situation. And I'm hanging on. I've got money. I'm ready. Because there's lots of people going to come off furlough in the UK soon. People are emotional about property. They'll hang on until they're forced, and then I'll buy some. But I won't buy unless the price is right. Otherwise, it's not emotional, it's factual. Remember at the beginning?
Yes.
You mentioned numbers. It's got to be the right numbers.
Yeah.
If the numbers are good, you do it. If they're not, you don't.
You and me are in the same boat then. I'm also liquidated, just holding on.
Yeah, well, I think I've got somebody, a nephew, who's after buying something now, and he just gave me an investment 2 days ago and said, what do you think of this? And I've chopped it up differently, and I think I looked at the history of it. He didn't know how to look at the history. I said, look, this in the last 5 years, this has been sold 3 times, and the price has come down each time. It's up for 100,000. I said, go for 80, and this is what you do with it. And it was something to convert to flats. I said, don't convert to flats. Too many flats. Nobody wants flats. There are lots of empty ones. And communal living, you've got problems. I said, make it into 3 houses, because it's just right for that. You can have 3 separate houses, split the title, nothing to do with each other, split the utilities. And then I reckoned he'd make £70,000 profit on that. Personally, it's not enough for me, but he's starting, so it'd be good for him.
Yeah. Okay, Ian.
Thank you.
How can people get in touch with you?
Well, Google my name, Ian Denston.
Google is your friend, people.
Yeah, I'm on the internet. Having an unusual name means you can't hide. It's easy to trace your family tree. It's easy to find you. And you can just put my name in and find my phone number and ring me.
Okay.
It's as easy as that. Or find my email address and ring me. Or find that in 2007, I used to work for North Lincolnshire Council, and they still have me down as working for them. But don't ring that one, it won't work.
No. There you have it, people. Ian Denston. Thank you very much for being on the Pengaflödet podcast, and hopefully we'll meet when this is over and we can have a chat and a coffee.
Yeah, I'll buy you a coffee. You come to Hull, I'll buy you a coffee, we'll have a good chat.
People, don't be stressed. Invest. Bye.
Bye.